better seeing you.
Legions on there. Sorry. How are you? Congratulations. Sorry. Where do you want me? Sit. Great. Oh yeah, I can use that.
You fine with that? Okay.
Hi, how are you doing?
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this talk by our very dear friend, the Consul General of Ireland, Mr. Peter Ryan. And this talk will be about a very important matter for all of us, Brexit, the Irish perspective. And before I give the floor to Peter, I would like to invite Mr. Rui Flores, who is the director of the European Union Academic Program, to make a brief introduction about our guests. And I would like also to thank the Rui Cunha Foundation for allowing us to use this magnificent room, and also to thank all of you. I see so many beautiful and young faces today, as well as the other, not so young, but very young at heart. And I really feel very, very happy with this particular occasion. But I'm sure that this is all because Peter is here with us. So,
funny.
Because of us. So thank you very much. Just a few words to introduce Peter to all of you. I think everybody knows him as the Consul General of Ireland to Hong Kong and Macau. Peter was born in Dublin in 1966.
Shocking.
Before joining the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ireland, he lived in Australia and worked with the Bank of Ireland, based in Dublin for 3 years. His first assignment was to work on reconciliation-focused projects with the International Fund for Ireland in 1994. From 1997 to 2000, he served in Tokyo, and then from 2000 to 2002, he was the Deputy Head of Mission in Seoul, in South Korea. Then he went back to Dublin. In 2004, he was assigned to the Department of Communications, Marine and Natural Resources as a specialist in technology matters, and served during this period in Singapore with responsibility for the Asia-Pacific region. In 2006, he was appointed as Director of Intellectual Exchange of the Asia-Europe Foundation in Singapore, also in Singapore, a governmental multilateral organization with 45 member countries from both regions, Asia and Europe. In 2009, on the successful completion of his 3-year assignment, he returned to Ireland and worked in the political division and head of the political secretariat, and then for a year as deputy director of the Asia-Pacific section in the Foreign Affairs Ministry. From 2011 and 2014, we are almost arriving to Hong Kong and Macau. He served as the Deputy Consul General of Ireland in New York, with special responsibility for the economic and public affairs. He was the first Consul General of Ireland to Hong Kong and Macau, a post that was Consul General that was opened in 2004. So thank you very much, Peter. Welcome to Macau.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderfully warm introduction. It's great to be amongst friends here this evening. Thanks for your, avoiding all the other distractions that there are in Macau in the evening and joining us. I'll try and keep it as interesting as I can for you. I hope we'll get a chance after I've gone through a few points to have a bit of an exchange, and I'd love to hear from you about your insights and any observations you may have from this part of the world. I think, as a diplomat, I was almost tempted to use the word young diplomat, but when I not only has it given away my date of birth, But secondly, he's given a very detailed, really very kindly has given a very detailed description of some of the printable activities I've been involved in over the years. But if you're wondering why I'm looking so well, it's because they did my makeup in CRED-DM. And I never took it off. But I took a great photograph of myself being applied with makeup to show my daughters when I go home, because this is what their bathrooms look like. You've never seen so much makeup in your life. So anyway, against that background, I suppose Brexit has been a monumental. It's a monumental milestone in the history, not just of Europe and not just of Britain, but I suppose in particular from the Irish perspective. So you'll forgive me if I take very much an Irish perspective on this evening, and I'll give you a chance to correct me later on if there's things that I've exaggerated or perhaps underestimated. We are 12 months after the referendum. I should let you in on something actually that my distinguished colleagues here were actually in Ireland, I think, at the time of the referendum in Britain. So they were hedging their bets just as the referendum was taking place next door. And I think that was last year when you very kindly brought the European Union programme and the students to Ireland. And I know that you were in Portugal this year. But that work is really important to us. We really appreciated you taking the time to come to Ireland last year. I think you couldn't have picked a more interesting time to come to Ireland and to Europe. I'm going to try and click my way through this, I hope. Yeah. I was asked to come here in 2014. I was in New York in the United States, as you heard, and I was asked to come here to set up our first consulate and be the first consul general to Macau and to Hong Kong. The government, the background to it is very simple. There'd been a government decision to open a number of new missions around the world. In the late, I suppose, probably around the time of the economic crisis, between 2007 and 2009. So as you can understand, that decision was postponed because Ireland had no money, and in fact we had to borrow money from the IMF and from the European Union, and from Britain, by the way. Which is an interesting point when we're talking about the relationship between Ireland and Britain. So the government postponed the opening of a number of important missions around the world in places where we felt we needed to have missions and we needed to have feet on the ground. And one of the places they postponed was the opening of the mission to this part of the world. We opened a mission, I think, in Jakarta, Bangkok, Austin, Texas, Hong Kong, somewhere else. I'm sure I've forgotten somewhere. I thought there was a fifth one, maybe Rio, maybe somewhere like that. So Hong Kong and Macau was just about the only place in the world I would have left New York for, to be honest with you. I knew this part of the world a little bit. I've been in and out of here over the years. And I was just very enthusiastic and welcomed the opportunity to come here. I group our activities essentially just from the consulate's point of view on three headings, just so I'll remember them, not for other people, it's for me. Community, obviously we have a big community in Hong Kong, 5,000 to 6,000 people of Irish who were born in Ireland. Almost the same number again of people who have Irish background or Irish citizenship of some type. We might come back to that too, because there's a lot of people who have British nationality, but who also have Irish heritage and who are entitled to Irish passports, and we're seeing a massive increase in that, which is also interesting. We have a much smaller community in Macau, maybe less than 100 people. Some pretty influential people around the place, and lots of great friends of Ireland here through some of our missionaries who've been here. We've had missionaries here for more than 150 years in Macau. And we're down to our very last missionary, actually, at the moment. But that legacy lives on in the connections that we have through schools here and through other groups. I came very much also to try to introduce Irish culture and support the Irish cultural efforts that have been made here, because I think if you're going to do anything in life, you have to increase the people-to-people exchange and to get some understanding of one another going. There's no point in suddenly arriving in the place and saying, hey, look at all the great things that we have to offer, unless we first try to understand the place a little bit and then try and connect some of our younger people in particular with what's going on here in Hong Kong and, of course, as part of our broader relationship with China. So that's that out of the way, okay? So why does Brexit matter for Ireland? You like that photograph, don't you? That's of Shane's castle, actually. I don't know whether, I think the designer of that castle would believe in climate change. So the next time that somebody tells you that climate change, no, these things haven't affected, there's no impact of man-made changes in the world and so on. You can just look at the castle. That was he had a nice front lawn when that was built about 500 years ago. Obviously, we do have a unique relationship with Britain. We have two political systems on the island of Ireland. We have Ireland, which is 26 counties, which is the majority of the island, if you like, and then we have Northern Ireland, which is 6 counties, which is still under British administration. We have a very successful peace process, which I think is one of the success stories of the European Union, actually. When I was growing up, violence was an everyday part of life in Ireland. I mean, gun violence, I mean, bombings, I mean, the assault, if you like, on arms of the state there, and the British Army on the street in Ireland, and the heavily armed police force, made up largely of members of one community. And that's behind us now, that's past. We could talk a little bit about that later on, but we're in the process now, we're in the midst of a peace process that's really been there, probably since 1988, and when Margaret Thatcher was in number 10, and then subsequently in 1998 when Tony Blair was in number 10. And essentially the British and Irish governments have agreed fundamental points of agreement for the first time, and in turn that's been agreed by the political parties, and in turn that's been agreed by people who were previously outside the political process, who felt that there was no pathway for them within the political process. These people now are integrated into the political system, which has been one of the great success stories of the European Union. We've obviously a very large Irish community in Britain. Britain has been, I mean, some of the cities in Britain, you know, we joke about them sometimes being almost more Irish than Ireland. So if you go to a place like Glasgow, you go to a place like Liverpool, Manchester, you can go to whole places across, traditionally in the 18th and 19th century, if you went to places like Newcastle and all places in the north of England. This is where Irish people went when they couldn't get work in Ireland, because we looked the same, kind of more or less talked the same, and we didn't need a passport and stuff, and we could just get in there and mingle, keep our heads down and work away. And of course, at a time of political difficulty in Ireland, at a time of when Ireland was particularly poor, undeveloped, we didn't have an industrial revolution, as you know, in Ireland. It was basically skipped. Ireland was to be the breadbasket for Britain. So as a result of that, Irish people, they either went to Britain, and if they didn't like it there, or if they were more ambitious, they headed to the US. And somebody was asking me earlier on about the Irish-American diaspora and so on. We have about 35 million people in America label themselves in the census that takes place every few years. They tick the box that says that they're Irish. And it's second only to one other ethnic group. Does anybody know who they are? Anybody know what group outnumbers the Irish in America? Germans. Largest ethnic group in America is German. That's a story for another night. So obviously our trade is very significant with Britain. Just to put that in scale for you, trade between Ireland and Britain is greater than... So Britain exports more to Ireland than they do to China. So there's about 10,000 Irish-born people who are directors of British companies. So the links are absolutely immense in business, in culture, in sport, right across every aspect of life. And also blood ties. So everybody has cousins, everybody has family, everybody has friends who are living and working in Britain. And increasingly nowadays, people are living and working in Ireland too. But at one time, it was one-way traffic. They'd send the British Army to keep us quiet, and we'd send people over there to work there. Thankfully, today we have just an open passport-free, actually, arrangement, and this is going to be really interesting now when we're coming into Brexit. We're talking about frontiers. So typically, you didn't have to carry any identification at all to go between Ireland and Britain. And then because of the troubles in Northern Ireland, the passport requirements came in, ID requirements came in, and so on. And now, of course, this is going to be the frontier of the European Union, right here on our little island, in a place that's been a conflict zone, you know, a very severe conflict zone within the European Union as part of, you know, a really highly developed, sophisticated economies, but in the centre of that we have a conflict resolution issue. So obviously we're going to be more affected, probably from our looking at it, we're going to be more affected than any other EU member state by Brexit. One just point to tell you at the beginning is we've taken a very pragmatic approach to this, which is, I hope colours a lot of the Irish experience and a lot of things that we do. We try to be just as practical as we can for it. But that didn't stop our government. I think it was one of the only European Union governments that actually campaigned on the ground in Britain for a vote to stay in the European Union. And it just shows maybe how much the Brits listen to us anyway, that they still voted the other way. But I mean, our Prime Minister, who we call our Taoiseach, and all of our cabinet members visited Britain actively over the 12 months leading up to the vote and said, this is our view of it, this is what we think the potential impact we think is very dangerous for Britain, we think is dangerous for our peace process, and we tried to mobilise the Irish community in Britain in favour of staying. At the time, we mapped out, I think, very broadly what our concerns were, but it shouldn't surprise you to see that we've kind of boiled it down now to 4 very clear priorities that we have. Obviously, we want to minimise the impact on trade and economy. Nobody wants to upset their economic model that's been working away well for 50 or 60 years. Nobody wants to do that. Britain doesn't want to do it either. In fact, you could probably say minimising impact on trade and economy we share with our British colleagues. We definitely share the second point because both of us have a common interest in supporting the Northern Ireland peace process. Nobody wants to see bombs again. That's not going to happen in our lifetime. That's finished. That's gone. The third one is also shared with the British, is that we want to maintain the common travel area. So we want freedom of movement between people in Ireland and Britain. We don't want people in Northern Ireland who say that they're British, then being asked when they get the ferry to Scotland, please show your British passport to come into Britain. This is going to be a complicated issue. This is not something that you want to do. This is like internal controls within Britain. So obviously we share the third with the British government as well. And the fourth one, I'm afraid we have on our own, because the British will no longer be in the European Union. They may influence it from outside. Of course they will, because they're going to continue in Europe. They're not going to go anytime soon. So they're going to be influential in another way in Europe. But we want to be influential within the European Union. And maybe I'll develop those points really quickly, and then we can try to come into a Q&A. Is that okay? If I can go in the right direction. You'll see there that there's a couple of interesting stats I'll just throw out for you. Almost half of all of Ireland's food imports come from Britain, which is always a great surprise to people when you consider that we export enough food for about 50 million. So Ireland is an agri-food giant, although we're only a small little country. We only have 1% of the European Union, but there's a couple of sectors in the world where we're world class, and one of them is in producing food. So we produce enough food at the moment, I think for either 50 or 60, somewhere between 50 and 60 million people, even though we only have a population of 6 million. But even allowing for that, and the fact that we sell so much of that to Britain, we still, 40% of all of our food imports still come from Britain. So what they call the high street in Britain, a lot of those shops would be very familiar in Ireland. They would be in every major city in Ireland. Maybe not down at the towns level, but certainly at the high street level in our local cities. A lot of the shops would be familiar. A lot of the products would be familiar. And then, of course, we export quite a lot to Britain also. You'll see about 50% of all of our food and live animals go to either Northern Ireland or Britain. This is where the European Union, the scale of what has to be undone in the European Union first starts to dawn on people. There was a great example, one of the products for which Ireland was renowned for exporting to 120 countries many years ago, before the end of the 18th century. Ireland exported a product called Guinness. Some of you may have heard of it. There was a really good story, a really good analysis a couple of weeks ago about the actual supply chain for Guinness now within Ireland. So Guinness buys its oats and barley. Some of the farmers that they buy from are in Northern Ireland. Products come to the south of Ireland for processing, and then are returned to the north of Ireland for further processing, and then come back to the south of Ireland, and then exported sometimes through the north and sometimes through the south. My goodness. Because there's no economic border, this is free movement of goods, free movement of people, free movement of imagination, innovation, all these things. And this is one of the reasons why we're absolutely determined that we can't go back to what they're calling a hard border. So we can't go back to the days when we had checkpoints, because we know exactly what the experience of this is in Ireland. We know what this means when you slice a farm in half and you tell the farmer, well, this cow on one side of the farm can be exported to any one of 27 member states without tariffs, but the other cow that's gone over the other half of the field, this now has to pay tariffs, it has to be re-exported, it has to pay duty. It's an absolute nightmare. So this is one of the reasons why, on the economic side, we don't think it makes sense to have a return of the border, and this is one of the reasons why we're very happy also, obviously, with Michel Barnier, who's the lead negotiator in the EU, who has recognised this and who said, look, we're absolutely determined that there won't be a return to this in Ireland. And that's good news for Guinness drinkers also. We think, obviously, that there are going to be opportunities also around Brexit as people are facing uncertainty. And, you know, somebody was asking me earlier today about saying, oh, you know, does that mean all the banks that are in London are going to move to Ireland? Of course they're not. But the fact is that global investors don't like uncertainty. They like to be sure about what's going to come next. So this is why we're seeing increasing inquiries from banks that are based in Britain, based in London. They're also looking at places like Frankfurt, places like Paris, places like Luxembourg, and places like Ireland. That doesn't mean they're moving 10,000 jobs. I think there was an example of Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley, one of these, and they're talking about they have 10,000 jobs in the City of London. At the most, you're looking at certain roles within those will move to a place within the European Union from which they can sell, just like the Guinness oats and barley, just like they can sell their products right across the EU. It's called passporting rights. So it means you can sell an EU product in any of those member states, an investment product. If there's a difficulty with the British system of leaving, with Brexit basically, people are worried, that they're saying, some of the financial guys are worried, saying, well, are we going to be able to do these activities from London anymore? So obviously they're going to hedge their bets and they're going to open operations in other places around Europe. I think it's quite natural. I still think London will continue to be one of the great global financial hubs of the world, and that's not going to change. Some of the types of business they're involved in may change, but we can talk about that a little bit further as well, if you like. Obviously, we have a 500-kilometre long border, and the border goes through people's houses, goes through people's farms, goes through towns. It does what borders do. It's not necessarily written by the smartest people in the world. They chose it basically on a map rather than going out and walking around. So with the result that we have a lot of hinterland and developments and towns that were held back for years from development because of the presence of a border. So we had places like Derry, you'll see there in the top left-hand corner, which you may have seen on the TV with Martin McGuinness's funeral and all that stuff. Derry is the hinterland. Derry is like the townland for everybody west of it. So if you can imagine, for 1,000 years, people who are farming everywhere to the west of Derry, when they wanted to sell their products, Derry is where they would go. This is where they would go. And then suddenly, 40 years ago, street violence and the army and bombings and everything came to this city, which then you could only enter through checkpoints. So these places were unnaturally cut off from one another, and this is one of the great achievements of the peace process, because these are all open now. So there's no presence, no police presence, no army presence, no sign that you've gone from one EU member state to another EU member state, apart from the currency, apart from the British pound being in use in Northern Ireland. But in most of those shops along the border, they'll take any currency. They're kind of like currency exchange people in some ways. They'll take US dollars, they like them, but they'll take either euro or British pounds. So obviously we want to support North-South cooperation as much as we can. We want to keep the EU engaged in the process. Really, really important for us. And anybody who knows anything about Ireland will know that involvement of the United States in the Irish peace process was hugely important, to have an independent guarantor of both the British and Irish government actions. That there was somebody outside the process who could look at it and say, okay, we think that in order to move this forward, here's some suggestions that we have. And this was really, really instrumental in changing. That was an absolute game changer in Northern Ireland. Because until Bill Clinton came along, Irish people felt, and particularly Irish Americans would have felt, that the American and the British were just arm in arm with each other. Absolutely, the Americans will only ever take the positions of the British on it. And then Bill Clinton came along and said, well, we're going to face this from an absolutely neutral viewpoint. So we're going to do this in a really self-confident way that's not going to impact our relationship with Britain anyway, which is very close between America and Britain. And I think he's been proven to be right. And another important element of that was the fact that we would have the European Union involved. And that changes not just from a political viewpoint to have the European Union, for example, looking at European Union regulations in the north of Ireland. Very simple example. Look at Equal Opportunities Acts. Look at things that the Catholic, the minority community in Northern Ireland was looking for 50 years. Things about equal opportunities. And guess what Europe has? Equal Opportunities Acts and social legislation right across the board. And these things we were able to bring and transplant to Ireland. So they transformed the whole social legislative framework, I suppose, that we worked to at the time. We have a common travel area I mentioned to you earlier. Some of you will be surprised to hear that the Dublin-London is the number one busiest route in Europe. It's the second busiest route in the world. Anyone know what the busiest route in the world is? Somebody said to me it was Hong Kong, Taipei, but somebody else said it's Tokyo, Osaka, so I'm not sure. But it's the second busiest in the world. It's cheaper to get a flight from Dublin to London than it is to get a taxi from London Heathrow Airport into the city. So when in doubt, jump on Ryanair and fly to Ireland. So we think that the common travel area is absolutely key. It is a unique thing in that Ireland and Britain had and developed a common travel area before the European Union was even dreamt of. Before the European Union came along, at the foundation of the state, Ireland took action, if you like, to try and protect its industries, and it went into an economic war with Britain. But even during the economic war with Britain, when every Irish product was banned essentially from Britain and from the British Empire, things like Scotch and things like beef and all that, or whiskey and Scotch, and so on, even then the common travel area was maintained. It was never allowed to be impacted by politics or anything else, no matter how the relationship between Ireland and Britain went. And we're really delighted that the European Union has prioritised that to keep that. Obviously, we want to be involved in the future direction of the European Union. We know that the alliances and some of the alliances in the European Union will change. I think if you were to sit in Brussels for the past 10 to 15 years, you would have said that so many similarities between Ireland's position and Britain's position on so many issues. So much of our history is intertwined, so many of our societies are similar. But there would be fundamental differences that we would have. Ireland will be a very pro-European amongst the general population. Although we have shown our concern a number of times, as you know, about referenda, about different stages of European integration. So the people have been able to separate what they see as concerns about neutrality and other things that will be very precious to Irish people, and the overall European project. And maybe that's in part because of the peace process. Maybe. I'd be interested to hear from some of you guys why you think that might be. But consistently, the Irish population consistently rate plus 85% in polls in favour of the European Union. And young people is even higher, plus 90% in polls. They did a poll just about 3 weeks ago, I think, the latest Eurobarometer poll. And Irish people between 18 and 35, that qualifies as young, between 18 and 35-year-olds, it was 90+% commitment to the European Union, which is really strong. So it's very important for us, obviously, to maintain that relationship, to try to be influential in it, to try to push forward things that we want to see, and to try and really also to be a champion of the European Union, to say what the success stories of it are and to be honest about where we see the shortcomings. And I think Ireland is a pretty good example of a country that's benefited from European Union membership. I hope I'm going the right way. There's a few really interesting points about the impact of EU membership on Ireland. We're coming into an uncertain time, remember, because this will be the very first time after 2019, this will be the very first time that Ireland is in the European Union without Britain, which is a really monumental thing, as I said at the very start. This is a real change. We joined on the same day in 1973. So much of our development has happened within that time. I think for Ireland, probably, the European Union was more important in a lot of interesting ways. One of the interesting ways, of course, is that because Ireland had left the Commonwealth of Britain in the early 1940s, late 1930s, we were essentially cut off from a lot of the world and a lot of the world's politics and global politics. So therefore, when the United Nations came along, we tried to get in there as quickly as we could. The Russians did their best to block us because they thought we were going to vote for the United States on everything, which is kind of interesting. And then Ireland duly joined as a member, I think about 61 years ago or so, basically as soon as we could get into the United Nations. We've served in we've sent peacekeepers to almost every single UN conflict resolution effort in the world. We have troops at the moment in 7 different UN peace missions around the world. We really believe in the internationalization. The whole point of getting our independence was not that we could be just another Irish voice within the British Empire. The whole point of our independence that we could reach out to these countries looking for their independence around the world, who looked to Ireland for an example, like places like India, places right across Africa, places where we had missionaries for many, many years, places where we wanted to make an impact on a number of global issues. And the global issues with which Ireland, I suppose, will be most identified will be things like disarmament and hunger eradication, non-proliferation treaties. Ireland will be very active in a lot of these areas. We also have a very interesting link with China through the United Nations, because China did not actually lobby Ireland when it came to take over the seat that Taiwan had been holding on the Security Council. China did not lobby Ireland because they thought Ireland would vote with the United States. And in fact, given Ireland's history, anybody who'd taken 5 minutes to understand our history and our battle for independence, of course we voted for China to take over the seat from Taiwan. We voted against the United States, when probably, I think there's a few Irish Americans got a bit of a fright that day when they saw that. But we really felt that the European Union membership then offered us another opportunity within our own region to really start to build those links that for many years we weren't able to have because we weren't independent. So we all know stories about parts of Ireland like Waterford and Galway where there was more Spanish spoken than English, like places like Waterford where French was spoken. We all knew of these stories going back many, many hundreds of years. The European Union gave us an opportunity to reawaken a lot of those connections. And I think particularly our younger people have benefited most strongly. And you see a statistic there, I think about 50,000 young people in Ireland have gone to European countries on the Erasmus programme. That's pretty extraordinary stuff for a country the size of Ireland and the number of students we have, that 50,000 have gone. So it's really, if you like, kind of opened up the whole region to us, the relationships with countries right across Europe, and it's allowed us, I suppose, to play much more of a role on a global stage. And the reason for that is very simple. If you're coming with the European Union firepower, soft power and hard power, apart from non-military hard power, if you like, if you're coming with that to global issues, you're coming from a much more powerful position. So a country like Ireland has an obsession with hunger eradication, for example. Most of our aid programme that we give in the world, and we give more probably per capita than any country on the planet, and it's mainly focused on hunger eradication. And you know why? Because we had a famine in our, just 4 generations ago in Ireland, where we had a population of 8 million people. We've now got a population of 6 million people. So we're still the only country in the world out of 193 members of the United Nations that has a smaller population today than it had 150 years ago. So this is a big play on the way Irish people approach the world and the way they look at international relations. So for us to be a part of the European Union was much, much more than just trade to us. We were really stepping up as a member of the world community. And because we came with 27, or we started with 12 and into 15, and the latest count was 28, when it got to 28, this was such a beneficial thing for us at a United Nations level, at all the international negotiations, to be part of a European, a single European negotiating team, and to influence that, and to try to use that influence in the benefit of addressing a lot of the global humanitarian issues. Of course, there's a hard bit to it as well, in that the European Union, as part of the cohesion plan and structural plan, to try to bring all members of the European Union up to the same level of economic development. Ireland has received about 40 billion euros in payments to, anybody who spent 5 minutes in the country will see the roads, they'll see the airports, they'll see the infrastructure that's there. We've spent it in Ireland. I think it's one of the places that is a success story because you can see the difference. You can see the difference. When I was growing up and we drove to Northern Ireland, for example, 2 hours up the road to Belfast, the road in the south of Ireland will be not such a great road. And then you get to Northern Ireland and wow, now you really knew you were in Northern Ireland because wow, the road was amazing, the cars were better and everything. Try doing it now and try to see the impact that the European Union spending has had. So I think we've spent the money well. Ireland is now a net contributor to the European Union, and we see that, and we see other countries who have joined the European Union later than us, who are going through a very similar stage of development. So there's no issue in Ireland about our financial commitment to the European Union, because we see other places and some of the newer member states need to have the same opportunity that we had. And that's not something that we begrudge to other people. One of the really interesting points about the EU membership of Ireland is that many people, British people I'm sure in the room, a couple of Irish people around, we have a unique situation in Ireland whereby we consume British media in Ireland. So we're between American media on one side, we've British media on the other side. So we watch British TV stations, we used to watch them for free, now you have to pay. But in the old days you used to watch them for free. We have newspapers, we follow the same soccer teams. Irish people will know all about Theresa May, they know all about Jeremy Corbyn, they know all about different parts of British life. They'll be very familiar to them. British people maybe less so, because that's a size thing. That's natural between a small neighbour and a big neighbour. But if you think of the narrative and the messages that were used during the Brexit debate, and you think about the narrative and the messaging that was used during the US general election debate, we're slap bang in the middle of that. The United States is on one side of us and Britain is on the other side of us. But none of the negative messaging that you would associate with those campaigns has any resonance in Ireland. None, zero. We don't have a right-wing party, for example, in the conventional right-wing form of things. We don't have a left-wing party. Somebody was saying to me today about the influence of the communist parties in Europe on the labour movement. What? We haven't had a communist party in Ireland for 50 years. Everyone's in the middle in Ireland. And you know what? We used to laugh about it. Political scientists used to try and decipher it and see does it make sense. But actually, in a way, it's helped stability. So it means that when there's a change of party or a change of government, not actually a whole lot changes. And when the British first left Ireland, the joke was that we just took the crown off everything and replaced it with a harp, literally, like they did in Hong Kong. They took off their caps. They changed the badge on the caps on the 1st of July 20 years ago. That's exactly what they did. So that actually has helped us in terms of stability in society. And that's been, I think, pretty important to us. And that's something that we've brought to the European agenda also. You'll enjoy that photograph there. You all know what that is, of course. This is the photograph that Chinese media use when they're talking about the the growth of soccer and promotion of soccer in China. Well, I'll let you all in on a secret. This is not a soccer ball he's kicking. He's kicking what's called a Gaelic football, which is a game that's unique to Ireland. And because the Chinese are very smart, the place where President Xi Jinping came to visit when he came to Ireland wasn't necessarily the normal sort of things you might expect him to do. He went to a place that's at the centre of Irish culture and Irish life. And actually the organisation who built the stadium that he's visiting there is the largest amateur sporting organisation on the planet, which is quite amazing. But the Chinese are very smart. This is the place where he came. Anyway, the next time you see that photograph, it's the only photograph of him kicking a football. So the next time you see it, you'll be able to know it's not a soccer football, it's a Gaelic football, and you heard about it. I think we have a very successful and flourishing relationship with China. We're the fastest growing European Union member state in financial terms with them. Obviously, there's going to be things that are going to continue, that are going to continue, but then there's particular features maybe of Ireland that are going to really be up in lights over the coming period. Part of it is going to be around the commitment of Ireland to the European Union and our membership of that. And I think just 2 weeks ago we had a visit by Party Secretary Hu of Guangdong province, who came with, I think, 350 or something like that of his closest friends on a visit to Ireland. And we're just seeing a real flourishing of relations with China. And it's not surprising, because some of the things that we have and some of the strengths that Ireland has are things that perhaps are of interest, and certainly in the last 5-year plan there's a good fit, I think, between technology and education and research and development, some of the areas in which Ireland is pretty strong, and certainly we believe that we've something to offer Macau and Hong Kong, and indeed China also. Our economy is the fastest growing economy in the European Union this year. It was the fastest growing last year, and it was the fastest growing in 2015. So if you had to deal with an issue like Brexit, to have in place a rock-solid peace process, to have strong economic growth, and to have a commitment from Europe to recognise the special status of Ireland in these negotiations, they're 3 pretty good things to have in your pocket. I wouldn't like to be going through this area, or through this time, or this issue, if we were where we were in 2008, when we had to go and borrow 60 billion euros. I wouldn't like to be suddenly faced with Brexit. Whereas I think we're in a stronger position now to deal with it. We're going to deal with it as one of the 27. Again, it's a very unusual position for the Irish government. Remember, we went in with Britain in '73, and then last Monday, as you know, last week, Theresa May comes to the European Council. She's sitting on the other side of the table from us for the first time, and then she leaves after she's made her proposals regarding the treatment of EU citizens in the EU citizens in Britain and British citizens in the EU. Then she leaves the meeting. So this is new territory for us. We're going to try to make sure that the relationship with Britain remains as strong as it should be and as it has been. And we're going to try to make sure that we can help and be influential in these Brexit talks and try and move them forward as best we can. I'm not sure that's enough. That's enough for me. There's lots of propaganda there you can read about. I think we'll leave it with a nice photo somewhere. Will I find a nice photo? And we'll leave it with that. But I'd be delighted to, there's a nice photo. I'd be delighted to take any questions or to hear people's views. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So the floor is open for questions. So maybe you can introduce just your name and...
So thank you, sir, for your wonderful remarks. My name is Florence, and I'm student currently majoring in international relations in University of Macau. I have 2 questions regarding this topic. The first one is, recently we know that UK election has just happened and a hung parliament was resulted. And I would like to ask the impact towards Irish Brexit negotiation, particularly after this election, will it create positive or negative impacts towards Ireland's positioning in Brexit negotiation? This is my first question. The second question is regarding Scottish independence. I would like to know in particular Ireland's position in the Scottish independence. And given that Brexit has been like an ongoing process, how likely do you personally think Scotland will initiate another referendum, like after 2016 or 15? Sorry, yeah.
Florence, I like your style. Ask her.
Thank you.
Hook me in and then club me over the head. Certainly, with regard to the confidence and supply arrangement that's been announced between the DUP in Ireland and the Conservative Party in Britain, the fact is that this will ensure that the concerns of the DUP and the concerns of Northern Ireland are actually being heard in London, which is always a good thing. We're in the process as we speak. We have a deadline of Thursday to reach agreement on the re-establishment of a devolved government in Northern Ireland. We need to get that back up and running. Our government is there actually today and tomorrow, and they need to. They've been very confident because they've booked a slot in the local assembly, which is local parliament. They've booked a slot there for lunchtime on Thursday. So maybe that tells us that they're going to have a vote for a First Minister and a Deputy First Minister. I don't know. But I do know that the fact that the DUP were able to negotiate with the Conservative Party and tell them about what their concerns are regarding the same concerns that I have. They don't want to see anything that's going to impact the peace process either. They don't want to see a hard border on the island of Ireland either. They don't want to see an economic border on the island of Ireland. They want to see exactly the sort of issues that or the position that I mentioned to you earlier. I think one of the interesting results of all of this is, of course, what I mentioned earlier about British people not really taking such a close view in Ireland. It's been really entertaining following the commentators in Britain who are suddenly hearing about the DUP for the first time. Who are these people? And these are people we've been trying to deal with and have been dealing with for generations, maybe 600 years, maybe since the plantation of Ulster. And it's like it's news to a lot of people in Britain for the first time. Hey, who are these guys? Do they really believe these things? Is this for real? And I've no doubt that they'll be able to find a way to work together. The DUP, remember, have been in government with Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland, people who were absolutely determined to bring down the state, never mind to go into government with somebody who was literally going to bring down the state. So anything is possible. And I would be very hopeful that we'll get a devolved government in the next 2 days. And I'd be very hopeful that the DUP will bring to the cabinet and bring to the British parliamentary system the worries, I suppose, and the concerns of their constituents in Northern Ireland, a majority of whom voted against Brexit, which is always interesting to note. I don't do comments on Scottish independence or anything like that, I'm afraid. I'd be happy to chat about it and to hear people's views on it, but we don't have I can't take a view as an Irish government representative one way or the other. Nice try, though.
So, please.
Oh, yeah.
And we know that the relation between Ireland and US is definitely not as good as the relation between. Should I speak again? Yeah. The relation between Ireland and US is definitely not as good as the relation between most of the member states in EU with the United States. So do you think that Irish attitude towards US will affect the cooperation between Ireland and other European nations?
Well, I wasn't aware that our relations with the US weren't very good. I think we're still the only country in the world to have to be lucky enough to have the use of the White House on our National Day for St. Patrick's Day. We think that will continue. We have extraordinary bonds of kinship and history and everything else What we don't have is military alliance and so on. We don't get involved in any of that. We're military neutral. We have an extraordinary number of US companies with investments in Ireland. And similarly, we have a lot of the Irish global companies would be operating in the United States. Our tourism, we have more than 1.1 million visitors from that part of the world every year. They're not aware of any problem with the US. Relations are pretty good. We think they'll be fine. These things have a way of working themselves out over time. And certainly from our viewpoint, I mean, one of the issues would be around if there's an effort to address offshore investments by American companies, and if there's issues around these things, these are things that will certainly impact on us. If there's an issue around dealing with people, the undocumented people who are there who don't have the right to be or to live and work in the United States, that would certainly be an issue for us because there's around 50,000 Irish people there. But certainly the American involvement in Ireland continues to be as strong as ever, and whether that's in supporting the peace process in Northern Ireland. I mean, how many conflict zones in the world have a personal representative of the US government involved in the talks, which is what we have. So this is something very special to us, and that's not going to change anytime soon. It's going to continue to be strong. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, next question, please.
Hi, Peter. Thank you for the sharing enlightening information. If you want to share some Guinness as well, we'll be happy to. Anyhow, my question is very simple. You've talked about Ireland having some sort of special status in terms of the border control and the trade. So my question is, does it weaken the European Union's position in trying to secure that special status for Ireland? Because the issue of being the immigration backdoor to enter the UK, for me, doesn't make a lot of sense, because to get to Ireland, you need a flight. So that's not really a problem. But in terms of trade, it might actually be a problem, because it would be easier to circumvent around the barriers to trade that will be necessarily, or I think, implemented after this Brexit.
I mean, it's a great question. I think, thankfully, the European Union negotiators have decided that this is something that they can negotiate in tandem. So, you know, they've agreed now between the European Council this week and the European Council meeting in October, there'll be 4 sets of negotiations. They've announced the 3 teams, the team leading with the EU citizens' rights and British citizens' rights, the price, basically the cost to leave, and everything else, if you like, is grouped under number 3. And then they've set up a specific working party to recognise this issue of the border in Ireland, all right, which we've been through here. And they don't see there's any reason why we can't discuss these things in tandem with one another. This is a really complex set of negotiations that are going to take place. It's a huge burden, frankly, on a single member state of the Union to take on this level of negotiation. But it's something that the European Union has thankfully recognised. It is a special situation. It is a unique situation. We are going to be the frontier, if you like, of Europe, which is not something that we want it to be. You know, we don't want a border on our island. We don't want differences. We want to continue to make things easy for people, for goods, for ideas, for everything to flourish, for cultures to flourish there. The very last thing we need is to put any barriers in there. And in fact, we would prefer, of course, if Britain stayed in the single market and the customs union, because that would make it easier for everybody on all fronts. But the fact that they aren't is you know, we accept that and all that. But I haven't actually heard that argument put forward, thankfully, by the Conservatives or the Labour Party or any particular parties in Britain haven't felt that this in some way could impact the British negotiating position. I think they have, you know, the whole negotiating process is going to be complicated, but it got off to a really constructive start, I think, last week. Really constructive start. And yeah, and that's where we need to be. And we need to be optimistic, actually, a little bit optimistic about Europe as well, because, you know, the European economy is growing quicker than the American economy is. Europe at the European Council last week, for those who didn't notice, they recommitted themselves to the commitments that they made in Paris. And that was a pretty substantial thing to do, and it didn't get a whole lot of attention perhaps in this part of the world. But that's a that's a real statement of intent by the European member states that the agreements that were reached in Paris, they stand, that we're going to try and work towards them. We're all going to try to fulfill the commitments that we made, and that we're not going to go and renegotiate that. And that's the future of the world, frankly, is at stake on that stuff.
Thank you, Peter, for a wonderful exposition, as always. I think a number of us would have wished for a rather higher level discussion following that momentous decision on the 23rd of June of last year. We simply haven't had that in the British Parliament. Nonetheless, the notion of reaching a kind of Goldilocks mean, a Brexit which is neither too hot nor too cold, simply isn't on the table. And I think I'd want to show unity with the Irish in the sense that what we must preserve above all else is the peace process, which has been so hard won. And we've got to hang on to that.
Thank you very much, Professor Thompson. And I think I think that's a very good point that you're making. I think one of the things is that it's kind of like a phony war. It was kind of like a phony war for the first 12 months. Everybody has given their viewpoint about what's going to happen and everything else. And, you know, when I was asked, my view was, I don't have any idea at all, but I'm quite happy to share a couple of points that we're looking at and that we're considering. But it doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to take place. Last week was the very first time that we heard definitively there are 3 negotiating teams. There will be 4 sets of negotiations before we go to the October Council. We saw a concrete offer from the British, from Theresa May, who spoke to it and then subsequently published it, about how we're going to deal, the British negotiating position, if you like, on how we're going to deal with EU citizens in Britain. There's as many as 3 million EU citizens in Britain. So I'm looking at Bloomberg. I don't know whether anybody else here ever follows Bloomberg to see what's going on in the world. And Bloomberg is pumping out stories all day, every day, and I'm sure other people are too, about Brexit and, oh, you know, half of the skilled EU professionals are thinking of leaving. Troll to the bottom, and it's a poll that they've done of 100 people who they asked who work in the City of London. You know, if you and I went out, we could get that too. So I think it really is important that we have an informed discussion about what's going on. We didn't have an informed discussion, or as informed a discussion as we might have had ahead of the referendum, to be honest. That would certainly be our government's view of it. That's why we went and involved ourselves in somebody else's referendum, which we've never done before. I hope we never do again. It's dangerous territory. But we did it because we actually felt that there was we really needed to alert people to say, this is what the impact is going to be just in Ireland, never mind anything else. Just in Ireland, this is the likely impact. So I think there is a place for it. I think we'll start to see that now. I think there's a place for think tanks, frankly. There's a space for smart people to step forward and create opportunities for people to discuss this. I think we all have a role to play in it. Frankly, the British community overseas has a role. The Irish community certainly has a role overseas. If people overseas from Ireland don't like something, I hope they feel that they can come forward and explain that to me, and I'll find a way to feed that back into our system. And we want to find a way to protect our future relationship with Britain, the future relationship with the European Union, and particularly, obviously, on the island of Ireland. Anybody else? Hiya.
Hi, thank you very much. Rebecca Donlan from MGM. I'm a local Irish lady. So with all the upset that Brexit caused in Scotland and asking for, and don't worry, I'm not asking a question about Scotland, in looking for independence, is that same kind of impetus being created in Ireland for reunification between North and South? Is that happening at all? Are you seeing that?
Yeah, good question, Rebecca. I think there has been. Certainly, there's 1 or 2 of the parties are saying, "Oh, it's time to have a border poll" and so on. I think some of the commentators are saying, "Do we really need?" I mean, elections in Ireland are not normally good news. Referenda in Ireland are not normally. It's not normally something that brings people together, particularly in Northern Ireland. It tends to, as we've seen in the most recent election, the middle ground has been has been dissipated. Essentially, the middle ground is gone now. So we have the bulk of the parties, the DUP, if you like, the majority from a unionist pro-British perspective, and then Sinn Féin essentially on its own on the pro-Irish side, if you like. And in my humble experience of 30 years or whatever, 20 plus years working on the north of Ireland, elections come at the wrong time. They always seem to come at the wrong time. Just when relationships are building, when trust is being built, and then somebody calls an election and these guys go back into their own territories and they say, well, I got to say what I have to say, these things, because I want to get re-elected. They're quite straight up about it. They say, this is what I have to say because I have to get re-elected. I can't go back to my community and explain to them this really sophisticated view of the world to say, you know, we're taking a 50-year long-term approach and blah, blah, and we're all going to be friends and we're not going to worry about identity. That's not going to get you a vote in West Belfast. You're going to have to go in and say, well, actually, I'm going to go and fight for this community. And so that, in my view, I don't think we should necessarily go for a 50+1 vote. Because when you go for black and white things in Ireland, it's divisive, and it means that you would be creating, just like in Brexit, you would have a very significant proportion of the population who are fundamentally opposed to what might have just been voted on. So I prefer, frankly, to see another 50 years of reconciliation with each other. And if you think of the British and Irish relationship that we have now, it's absolutely transformed. I mean, the Queen of England came and visited Ireland. Prince Charles came and visited Ireland. It took until 2014 for the President of Ireland to make a state visit to Britain. President of Ireland. Like, it took from our foundation of the state in Ireland, 1921, to 2014 to make an official visit to Britain. It's an hour. Second busiest plane route in the world. So we're getting there. I think great progress has been made. I wouldn't be rushing into doing these things. And the example sometimes that I use is that if you think of places like Belgium, think of places like Switzerland, there's a number of places, the Netherlands is a good example, where they've had conflict. They had conflict for hundreds of years. They even called it 300-year war at one stage. They had religious conflict. Since then, they all focused on prosperity. They focused on having local government that enabled them to show their identity and support their identity and not squash somebody else's identity in the process. The problem in Ireland was that there wasn't that nurturing of identities. It was that one identity was seen as being a foreign one, and the other one was seen as being, well, you're just trying to overthrow the state. So there was no middle ground. And anyway, I firmly believe that if we have continued membership of the European Union for another 50 years, we'll get closer and closer and closer to something that maybe might be United Ireland. I certainly would like to see one. It would be a great, it would be transformative, obviously, for all of us, I think. But it may not look like we think it'll look like. It may not necessarily be a place with the same flags, for example. It may not be the same place with the same symbols. It may not have the same form of government. It may not have a parliament in Dublin. Who's to say it couldn't have a number of devolved parliaments in the country? So the most important thing, I think, is economic progress and peace. And if we can do that, everything else will follow. That's the plan. Thank you.
So, more questions? Any more questions? Please. Do you mind?
No, not at all. Go for it, Ken. Just don't ask me about Scotland, it'll be okay.
Yeah, one reason that foster British leaving the European Union is that some people in Britain believe that their participation in the EU is reducing the uniqueness of the culture and identity of Britain. And do you think that it is really the case in Britain? And how about the case in Ireland?
I think that's a great question. I think, first of all, the multicultural nature of Britain is, I mean, Britain was probably had a more of a multicultural mix than probably any other European Union member state, probably up until the last decade when a lot of us caught up. Certainly Ireland would have been a very homogenous place. We would have all looked the same, talked the same, thought the same. We probably didn't have the influx because we didn't have empires and we didn't have all these sort of things. So Britain would have always looked like a very multicultural place to us. when we went to visit and we saw, you know, people from all across the world living and working harmoniously side by side with each other. But that definitely has been probably unsettling over decades and decades for British people. Of course it has. That change is, you know, can be very unsettling and destabilising for people. In our case, we just haven't had the same numbers of people coming. We take in a lot of migrants from Ireland, into Ireland. We have a lot of two-way flow, if you like, people coming and going. We had, you know, we typically have about 100,000 people, somewhere between 80 and 100,000 people leaving Ireland in 2008, 2009, 2010. Basically, as soon as they finished in college, our young Irish people were gone because there was no new jobs being created. At the time of the opening of the European Union, we brought in a lot of people from the new member states who are an absolute godsend in Ireland. People love them. They've settled in very well, very readily. But you know what? That's easier in a place like Ireland, perhaps, which doesn't have maybe the same class issues, or it doesn't have the inner city issues, maybe big urban sprawl that you have in other places, in other cities around Europe, where this is it's a major challenge for housing, for education, for health, all of these, and for the labour market, of course. And you see it even, you know, you see it in cities right around the world. It's very hard for countries to continually bring in new workers from around the world and house them, and then suddenly there are children involved, there's schools, there's health issues and so on. And I think London has been one of the world's great cities for absorbing so many people and so many places around the world, from so many different places around the world. And they've been doing that essentially for decades. It's not just in the last few years. I think one of the issues for us about our cultural identity, if I could answer the question by just talking in the Irish example, we have our own language. We have our own unique culture, our own literature, our own dancing, our own music, our own sport. And we felt that through European Union membership, we were elevating that. We didn't think, oh, we're putting that under more threat. We took the opposite approach to it, because suddenly we see similarities, of course, as you would expect to see, right across Europe. And we say, wow, okay. So our dancing is actually very similar to a lot of things that's going on elsewhere. So we would view this question about identity in a different way, and we would see as part of a shared European identity that we have. A lot of the values that the three of us here on the podium share are values that we think we actually think they're universal values, frankly, but we'd like to think of them particularly as a lot of them having originated for the first time perhaps in Europe. And we bring that to a world stage, and we don't bring it just as Ireland. We bring it as Portuguese people, as British people, as French, as Germans. And we think that helps the power of our argument. And in a Europe, and just, you know, remember, when, you know, you probably saw or referred earlier on to some of the work that I was lucky enough to do in Asia at different times over the years, and including with the conflict in East Timor and other places. And one of the things we used to say to them was, have you any idea what Europe has been through? The European Union there's a reason why it won the Nobel Prize. What was it, 3-4 years ago? It is one of the great projects in the history of the world, of mankind. And that's whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, for trade or migration or identity, whatever. But the fact is, if you just looked at peace, if you just looked at the fact that the French government have a cabinet meeting in Germany. The German government has a cabinet meeting. The whole government comes to Paris and sits there. And they talk about German business in Paris. If that is not proof of the success of the European project in a place that was destroyed during my father's lifetime, that's my father's lifetime. This is not ancient history. This is just one generation ago. Not destroyed once, actually. Destroyed twice. And spread from there to infect the whole world with the violence. So I think that's the best point, if you ask me about my European identity and why it matters to me, to stand with those countries in Europe who are going through maybe what we've gone through, maybe their experience is different, who knows. But I would think it's really important that we stand together and we keep the peace and be a shining light for the world.
Well, thank you very much. I think we could not have expected more than this wonderful and faithful statement about the EU and its future. And I think that all of us, we are very thankful for your wonderful presentation, as well as the way you negotiate the questions, even the hardest one that Florence here has been able to start with. And I want to thank all of you for your questions also, because this is the way that these sessions really comes alive. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you. That's great. Where's the Guinness?
Let's go.
I think
That's great.
we have some drinks there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure if we have Guinness, but...